time for us to check back in with the thread that runs so true. If you missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. The ages of our pupils in Maxwell High School ranged from 11 to 69. Rural teachers came to Maxwell High School. Many of these rural teachers had taught the pupils in Maxwell High School that we were now teaching. It was interesting to observe the competition between pupil and former teacher. One morning before school time, Cooge Baines came into my office with his first-year algebra in his hand. I pitied this tall, lanky, rural schoolteacher who had taught the same little one-room school for 41 years because his blood kin lived in this district and had elected the school trustees that had elected him to teach members of their clan. The majority of his pupils had been relatives. I knew when Cooge walked into my office he wanted to drop first-year algebra. "Now, Mr. Stuart, I hate to take your time," he apologized in his slow drawl, "but I have to see you about this algebra." "That's all right, Mr. Baines," I said. "That's what I'm here for. I, too, had trouble with algebra. Don't feel too badly about it. You've sent me some of the best high school pupils I ever taught." "But, Mr. Stuart," Cooge Baines tried to interrupt. "Now, we're glad you're here," I broke in, "and we'll be as easy with you on this algebra as we can." "But, Mr. Stuart, this problem is not what you think it is," Cooge Baines said. "Mrs. Laird says that she can't teach me." "Then stay in the class this year, absorb as much as you can, and take it over again next year," I advised him. "But I can work every problem in this book," he said. "I could work every problem in this book before you were born." "You can work every problem in that book?" I repeated. "And the second-year algebra book, too," he said, "and everything in plane geometry." "Where and when did you take algebra and geometry?" I asked. "I've never had them in school," he said. I sat and looked at this man. How I had been fooled. I had seen him many times in Lansboro when I was a high school pupil. I had taken my first teacher's examination with him, for I remembered his razor-hacked, half-shaven, bony face and his flaming red hair, and I wondered then how he would ever pass a teacher's examination. "You know, Mr. Stuart," he said, breaking the silence, "I have always thirsted for knowledge, like a man thirsts for water. I grew up in the mountains, where they didn't have schools in my day. The closest school was 8 miles. I got very little education from schools, but I have sat many a day on the beam of my plow and let the weeds take the corn while I read books and solved problems. I wasn't sure that my methods in algebra were right until I went over both first and second-year algebra with Mrs. Laird. And," he spoke softly and modestly, "she told me that I knew as much algebra as she did. That's why she sent me to you." I talked to Mrs. Laird about Cooge Baines. "He's the best algebra student I've ever seen," she said. "This man can work college algebra. There's no use to have him in my class. It's a waste of time for him and for me. He could teach my class." "I better call my superintendent and ask him what to do with a pupil like Cooge," I said. I called Mr. Manson, and he referred me to the Kentucky school law, which required a pupil to have so many lessons in the prescribed course before he could earn the unit in high school. I wrote to the State Department of Education about Cooge Baines, and I got a letter referring me to a certain section on a certain page of Kentucky school laws. This was the same law my superintendent had referred me to. All we could do with Cooge Baines was let him read every book in the library. We gave him the highest number of credits he was allowed to make in a year, and when we needed a substitute teacher in plane geometry, algebra, arithmetic, we used Cooge Baines. We didn't use him as a substitute teacher in English or in any of the social sciences. We had other rural teachers we could use in those subjects. Martha Binion, who had returned to high school as a sophomore at the age of 69, had been for many years a rural teacher in Greenwood County. 5 of her grandchildren, 3 of them A pupils, were in Maxwell High School, and they referred to her as Grandma Binion. Soon many of the other high school pupils affectionately called her Grandma. Every grade that she made in Maxwell High School was an A. She perhaps knew more grammar than any high school teacher in Maxwell High School, including the principal and the county school superintendent. She carried 5 subjects, but we used her very, very often as a substitute English teacher, and we didn't have a teacher who could handle a study hall as well as Grandma Binion. She graduated with honors at Maxwell High School, then went back to teaching in the rural schools. Then there was Vernon Madden, 28 years of age, who returned to finish 3 years at Maxwell High School. This man had finished only 1 year of high school. Then he had done considerable boxing. He had played professional baseball and football. He had ended up as a leather cutter for a shoe factory in Dartmouth, Ohio. And somehow he lost his job. I never asked him why he lost his job when he came to enter high school. I'd heard about his reputation for drinking, and I had a long talk with him. He was quite frank with me when he told me about the episodes of his life, which was like reading an adventure story. Now he wanted to put the past behind, like one would throw a bucket of ashes onto the heap, and to become a new man, and that was his reason for returning to school. I believed his story and allowed him to return to school despite criticisms from many people who knew his past life. He was an excellent athlete, and he helped Coach Myers with football, basketball, and baseball practice. He took care of all the athletic equipment as well, and he took as much interest in the athletic teams as if he were the coach. This man also carried 5 subjects in high school. He didn't graduate with scholastic honors, but he was perhaps one of the most valuable citizens to his county, state, and nation that we ever graduated from Maxwell High School. Our high school didn't help him any more than he helped the school. This man knew right from wrong, for he had lived on both sides of the fence, and when he advised one of our athletes about breaking a training rule, the athlete listened. The Tarleton citizens were later glad that I had taken Vernon Madden back to high school. He served the school and the community with honor. Another pupil, Charles Watson, 25 years of age, entered high school after he lost his job as a railroad engineer. He was bald-headed, and the pupils called him Pop Watson. He too helped Coach Myers with the athletic teams. He, like many of our other pupils, was regarded as a faculty member by strangers. When we followed the football team or basketball team away from home, many comments were made about our having such a large faculty. Many of the high school teachers were taken for older pupils, and Martha Binion, with her head of white high-piled hair and all her dignity, Cooge Baines, Vernon Madden, and Charles Watson were always regarded as faculty members along with dozens of others. Taking older pupils into Maxwell High School helped younger pupils. They saw these older people coming back to pick up the opportunity they had missed in their youth. They watched them working hard to learn all they could while time was with them. Never once did one of the older pupils that had come to Maxwell High School by invitation give us a discipline problem. Instead of their giving us trouble, they were of great value to us, and it was a pleasure to have them in our class. In my freshman algebra class, I gave my pupils daily assignments. I thought they would cover the assignments if I required them to work all of the problems on paper. I graded these papers. I recorded the grades, but I did not return the papers. Then I read the grades to the pupils. But on this day, after the bell had rung and my pupils were dismissed to go to other classes, one little girl, Ustasa Pratt, remained in the room. "Mr. Stuart, I didn't make 90 on my paper," Ustasa said. "Yes, you did, Ustasa," I said, looking at my grade book again to be sure. "Not disputing your word," she said politely, "but I made 100. "But I graded those papers," I told her. "You graded mine wrong," she said. "Where is my paper?" "Over there in the waste paper basket," I told her. "May I get it?" she asked. "No, I put it there, and I'll get it to convince you," I said. When I got the paper from the waste paper basket, Ustasa Pratt was right. She had made 100. Every problem on her paper was solved correctly. "I don't make mistakes, Mr. Stuart," she said, looking straight at me with soft blue eyes. "That's wonderful," I said. "You come to my office during your study hall period. I can use you. I need student secretaries who don't make mistakes." "I'll be there," she said. I stood watching this girl, straight as an arrow, with all the determination and self-confidence in the world, but who looked a little undernourished, rushed from my classroom to her second period class. And for the next 4 years, Ustasa was one of my student secretaries. She was one of the most efficient student secretaries I ever had in my office. She made all the transcripts of credits for Maxwell High School graduates going away to college. She made the transcripts when pupils transferred from Maxwell High School. If she ever made a mistake, I never knew it. I wondered about Ustasa Pratt's background after she challenged my grading her algebra papers. Once I asked her where she lived. "In that little house on the west bank of the Tiber," she told me. "You can see it from the schoolyard." "Is either one of your parents a teacher?" I asked. "My father is dead," she said. "My mother isn't a teacher." Ustasa didn't like to talk about her people, and this made me curious. I wanted to know more about her and her 2 sisters, who were also in Maxwell High School. All 3 were A pupils. They were approximately the same size. All of the little things that I had observed made me want to visit them. Though I had never been invited to visit this home, one sunny Saturday afternoon when I was walking along the Tiber, I made it a point to pass by. I walked slowly up the dusty road that wound between the Tiber River and the rocky palisade. Below me, down on the cool, crystal blue autumn water, I saw the leaves of the sycamore, birch, poplar, willow, oak, and wild plum, like an armada of multicolored ships moving restlessly to some faraway place. I had seen similar scenes when I taught Winston High School, which was approximately 20 miles up the river, and it was at Winston, when I walked beside this river, that I thought the future of my country's thinking, action, and progress rested squarely upon the shoulders of the nation's schoolteachers. I still believed I was right. Now, as I walked along toward the little shack at the foot of the palisade, I was wondering what was the background of 3 sisters who were among the best pupils in the school. The winding, leaf-strewn path led to the little house, where I saw one of the biggest wash of clothes hanging on clotheslines I had ever seen, and many of the dresses on these clotheslines I knew Ustasa, May, and Lucinda didn't wear. Ustasa introduced me to her mother, Samantha Pratt, who was washing clothes. She was a tiny, blue-eyed woman, smaller and thinner than any of her daughters. I met Samantha Pratt's son, Danny, of high school age, who didn't like school and refused to go. And I met a daughter older than Ustasa, a Maxwell High School graduate who clerked in Dartmouth, Ohio, at the 5 and 10 cent store. I later learned that Ustasa's father, Theopolis Pratt, had been dead for several years. Samantha Pratt had supported herself by doing housework, cooking for families, scrubbing and mopping floors for $2 per week. This little woman had worked during the day in people's homes, brought back a wash to do in the late afternoon, evening, or night, and her young daughters helped her. There were times when all the Pratts had to eat was bread. Yet Samantha Pratt had given to Maxwell High School 3 of its highest-ranking pupils in character and in brains. So this was where the girl came from who had stood up and faced me in the algebra classroom and told me she didn't make anything but hundreds. This is not all concerning Pratts. One evening late, I was walking over the valley farm land along Big River. I saw a clump of trees growing in the center of a big bottom. I wondered why this clump of trees had been left. When I walked over to this matted thicket of brush, briars, and trees, I saw some ancient, leaned over and fallen tombstones. I looked at the names on these headstones that dated back to the Revolutionary War. On one slab, I read the name Theopolis Pratt. The inscription beneath his name and dates of his birth and death said that he fought valiantly in the American Revolution. I learned later it was he who had come to the west end of Greenwood County when it was a wilderness. He had helped to pave the way for a Western civilization spreading across the continent. Now, I had 3 of his descendants in Maxwell High School who wore each other's dresses, who often ate bread alone because they didn't have anything else to eat with it. Ustasa's father, Theopolis Pratt, was named for his Revolutionary forebear sleeping over in Big River Bottom. This Theopolis had done another type of fighting. He had fought the building of the new Maxwell High School. It was he who had dared the contractors to lift a spade of dirt for the new high school that was to be erected across the Tiber River in front of his house. He had threatened with rifle bullet the first one to lift a spade of dirt. And it was he who at this time was selling moonshine whiskey. When local and federal officers went to arrest him, they took 12 men and surrounded the house. They were afraid of Theopolis Pratt, who slept with his 2 revolvers under his pillow. He kept other firearms nearby for longer range shooting. They arrested Theopolis Pratt. He was waiting trial when he walked one day down to the Farlington railway station. There 3 young men tried to bully Theopolis. Theopolis fought back against odds, killing one of these young men and chasing the other 2 away. He had 2 indictments against him. One was possessing and selling illegal whiskey. The other was for murder. Death released him from these indictments. He died one night in his sleep. Ustasa Pratt put all the fights she had inherited from her father, and she had inherited plenty, into her schoolwork. She directed all of her energy and ability into learning and good citizenship. She finished second in her class. She was nosed out of first honor by a small fraction of 1%. About the time of Ustasa's graduation, her uncle, T.J. Pratt, found a job for her in a Dartmouth shoe factory. I had a different idea for Ustasa's future. T.J. Pratt threatened me after we had quarreled over what Ustasa should do. He said for her to work in the shoe factory and pay the accumulated rent of the house they were living in, which belonged to him. And I said the rent of this house wasn't her responsibility, and she was the type to go to college. But she won't have the money to go to college, were his last words. Then I wrote a short story titled Ustasa and sent it to Household Magazine, where it was accepted. The story is now read by thousands of high school pupils, for it is in many literature and life books. I endorsed the check and gave it to Ustasa for her first year's expenses at Berea College. "Mr. Stuart, when will I pay this money back?" she asked. "Pay it to May when she enters Berea College," I said. "Then let May pay it to Lucinda when she enters Berea College. All you girls will be college graduates." All 3 graduated with excellent records. Today, 2 are teaching in Ohio and 1 is teaching in Virginia. Let's stop right there for today. Very interesting concept of the high school. We'd learned that in the previous reading, that Jesse had the ideal to let other people come to school, people that were not high school age. People that were older. So a lot of them were teaching at the rural schools and they'd never graduated from high school, even though they were teachers. So, and the superintendent, Mr. Manson, went right along with it, and he started letting all the schools do that. So really interesting. At the very beginning, when he's talking about the different ages of the student from 11 to 69, I think is what he said, it really reminded me of, if you've ever went to a community college or been involved with a community college, it really reminded me of classes that I took at our local community college when I went to school there. And even when Corey and Katie took classes there, you would have a class and it would be like that. There might be people, younger than you. There might be people older than you. There might be people old enough to be your grandparent, just like in here with Grandma Binion. So that real mix of different ages. Of course, in a community college, it's kind of the same concept that he was sharing about all these people. It's maybe people that lost their job and they decided to go back to school, but they hadn't been in school, in 20 years or something. Maybe it's people that right out of high school, they didn't go to college and they worked or something for 2 or 3 years and then they're back. And so they're kind of at that age range. And then, of course, there's some that just graduated from high school and they're just trying to get started on their college education. So community colleges are really known for that mix of people. And it's really interesting and I think really helpful for all the reasons that Jesse described there, is because you can, of course, as a younger person, you can learn so much from those who've, as Pap would say, has been down that road before, who've already had life and experiences, and they can share with you, and then you can share with those younger than you, and you can share with the older ones. I've been in classes where maybe an older student didn't exactly understand technology as good as some of the younger ones, and people would help them and show them, oh, this is how you do it, So really interesting that he started that during his time here at Maxwell High School, and that the superintendent went along with it for all the schools in Greenwood County. Now we meet another really interesting character, reminds you of Budge Waters, one of the ones from way back in the book, but Cooge. Cooge sounds like a really unique man and very interesting. And I don't love that Jesse doubted him, but I love the little scene there where Jesse thinks, oh, he's coming because he wants to drop out of algebra and I'm going to have to convince him to stay. And then it turns out that no, Cooge knew all about algebra. In fact, he knew so much the teacher couldn't teach him. There was just no reason for him to sit there and listen to stuff that he already knew. But I love it when Cooge said, I could do all these problems before you was ever born, Jesse. I've been doing this a long time. I love that. I wish I could have been there to see him. And he did, just the descriptive nature of how Jesse was describing him did make you really think of Budge Waters. But I loved when Cooge is telling him, he says, well, how did you learn all this? I didn't know you went to algebra, went to a school that taught algebra or geometry or whatever. And he says, no, I didn't. But I just have this thirst for learning, I really thirst for it, learning. And I love how he said it. He said he would sit on his plow and let the weeds take the corn. So in other words, while he should have been working, he should have been plowing the weeds out of the corn, weeding the corn, he would just if he had a book, he was just more interested in that, in learning and solving problems and thinking about how they work. Now, I've never been like that about learning, unless it's something I'm really interested in, which is the way of all of us, I guess. He was really interested in math and the problems and solving them. All that kind of stuff makes my brain hurt. I'm not interested in it and don't want to even think about it. I'm glad there's people that are, though. But the things that make me want to just let the weeds grow in the corn is a good story. If I've got a book, I just want to be in that story. I just can't put it down. I'm just reading page after page. And, times in my life, I try to work and read at the same time just because I can't. I just got to read one more page. Of course, my one more page turns into, 30 or 40 pages. So I feel like that about stories. And I feel like that, I guess, about things I'm really interested in learning, like if somebody was going to show me an old preservation way, to preserve food, or a new way to garden or something like that. But I loved that. He said he'd sit on his plow and let the weeds take the corn because he had such a thirst for learning. And then Jesse goes on to tell us about Grandma Binion. The whole school loved her, but I loved that he said she handled a study hall better than anybody else. I don't even know if they have study halls now. But I had a study hall when I was in high school, and there was always some kind of disruption going on in it because it was a lax thing, and a lot of people would try to work on their study, do what they were supposed to, and do their homework, but there was always some kids that didn't want to do that, and they were talking or getting in trouble or whatever. And then Vernon Madden, he had come back, and the community was kind of mad at Jesse for letting him come back because he had a bad reputation. But then he turned out to be just such an asset to the school with helping with the sports and also being able to, again, instruct the younger students, like, don't do like what I did, don't mess up, don't go down the road that I did. And then Charles Watson, who they ended up calling Pops because he was bald-headed, Jesse said. We would say that today still. If somebody's bald-headed, we wouldn't just say bald. So that's like a real Appalachian phrase there of saying it. I liked that part, though. And interesting then when they would go places to other counties to play basketball or baseball or whatever, and some of those older students would go with them, especially Vernon and Charles, then everybody would just assume, wow, you've got a big school, you've got a lot of faculty, when they were really students. They were not faculty, so that was interesting. And then we get to meet Ustasa and how she doesn't make mistakes. Isn't that so amazing that she knew she made 100 and she stood up to Jesse, and she was very nice, but she just said, you're wrong and I'm right. And then he found out she was, and then said, well, I want you to be my secretary, my student secretary. Now, I don't know of any schools in my area, and I may be wrong because I don't have anybody in school today, but in my area that does things like that, lets students do that. Maybe they still do at high school. When I was in high school, when I got to be a certain grade, I guess I was a junior, and I got to be an assistant. So I was an assistant to dear sweet lady Miss Meadows. She taught science and biology and things like that. And I would just help her do whatever she needed me to do, whether that was straightening up the classroom or, stapling stuff together or sorting out stuff or anything like that. And so maybe they still do that in high school, I'm not sure. But when I was at Martins Creek, which was a kindergarten through 8th grade in those days, now it's pre-K. Sadly, now it's just pre-K through the 5th grade because they moved our middle school this year. Anyway, but in those days, when you were in 8th grade, Mr. Moffitt or Mr. Smart, whoever was the principal during my tenure there, they would allow you to work, do things. Sometimes people got to go help in the kitchen in the afternoons if the lunchroom ladies needed help. I'm sure there was kids that probably helped with janitorial stuff. I can't really remember that. I just remember the kitchen, though, the lunchroom, and then in the office. And I was just so proud when I got to be in 8th grade and I got to help in the office. And this was at the old Martins Creek School. And so the 8th grade, 7th, our classes were split. So part of the 7th grade, but all of the 8th grade, the classroom. There was a little bitty narrow hallway that went out at the back of it. And then it went into the office, so it's like a passageway. There was a phone in there too, sitting on those big block things. Anyway, lots of memories there. But there was a telephone sitting right there. But then you went on through. The hallway was just real short. I don't know, 4 feet long or 5 feet or something like that. And then you went into the office. And in the office was, of course, the secretary's desk and the filing cabinets, all that kind of stuff. This is pre-computer, so she had a typewriter. And then there was like a little sitting area. And then there was like a little, almost like they just put up a wall because it didn't have a ceiling in it. It was just a wall, a partitioned off place. And in there was like where they stored the copy paper and all of the, think about Band-Aids and iodine and stuff like that, first aid kind of stuff in there. And so anyway, I would get to go help. At that time, the secretary was Miss Mann, and I'd get to go help her every evening just for, not for long, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever it was. And sometimes I would roll money, like they'd take in money in those days, more change, and I would roll money. I learned how to roll money there. That's one of the things. I, would know how much goes, how many quarters and how many dimes and all that. And then I would straighten up in the office or straighten up that little room that would always get messed up and just do whatever she'd ask me to do. I didn't get to do student records or transcripts or anything like the Ustasa was doing here. But I remember how much I really loved that, getting to help, and how it made me feel real accomplished, and got a first-hand view there of keeping up with records and people answering the phones, and a lot of those skills in there that I maybe wasn't doing, but I've seen firsthand in later years when I started working. I ended up doing a lot of those at different jobs I had, kind of secretarial stuff. So it's interesting. I'm not sure that schools do that, let kids work like that today. And of course we didn't get paid or anything like that. There was no understanding that we wouldn't get paid. It was just for life experience and to help out the school, because they needed us to, they needed a little bit of extra help. I really liked Jesse's description again when he's walking by the Tiber River, kind of like the one, like he said, when he was at Winston High School, and he gave those beautiful description. But in this one, he's talking about the leaves, the different leaves, and they look like the ship's about to set sail for all various places in the world, and he just made it sound so beautiful. I liked that. And then, of course, he just couldn't resist. He was so curious. He wanted to go to Ustasa's house and see how they lived and learn more about them. And he got to meet her mother and the two siblings that he didn't know. The boy who was not interested in school, I thought that was interesting. He don't really say much about him. Then the older sister that was already at work. And then over time, he was just so fascinated by by Ustasa, because she was so, she didn't make mistakes, and she was so willing to help and so determined to make good grades, and the other two, her two sisters too, that he just really kind of kept thinking about them. And so he learned this other stuff about their daddy, Theopolis, was that his name, I think, about him getting in trouble, and then he died before he could even go to trial, and then even about their ancestry, and so he said he could see that determination and that fight was passed down through the generations to Ustasa, but then she was using it in a good way, using it for to be determined to do well in school and to learn and to be so sure of herself, that she could tell the teacher, no, you're wrong, I made 100, and actually get him to go back and look and see that she did make 100. Really, then at the end, you can really see Jesse's generosity. He wanted her to go to school, and the other two sisters too, but especially her. She was too smart to just go work in a shoe factory. He felt like that she could, become a teacher or do whatever she wanted to do. And then the uncle's like, no, I really want her to go to work because they're not paying me rent, and I could get the money. But Jesse solved that by writing the story about her and selling it, and then giving her the money to go to Berea. So, and then he tells that, in the end, her and the two sisters all ended up going, and then they all ended up being teachers. So what a wonderful end to that story of determination. And hopefully they all helped their mother and, helped the brother there, and then went on to have their own family. So that's a nice place to end for today. I enjoyed this part. I hope you did too, and I hope you'll leave me a comment. Let me know what jumped out at you. And as always, I hope you'll drop back by next Friday. We're getting towards the end of the book, but we've got a little bit more to read before we get to the end. So you got to drop back by to find out what happens next.